Welcome to Building Bridges, bringing together financial industry experts from different horizons, sharing and discussing their insights.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen in India. Good morning to you here in Europe. Welcome to our Building Bridges with India. Cooperation between Luxembourg and India has nothing but grown since the diplomatic relations were established in 1948. Strong economic and financial ties make Luxembourg an ideal gateway for Indian investors and financial firms looking to access the European financial markets. Today's Building Bridges with India will explore these ties, discuss recent developments and challenges, as well as opportunities and outlooks, both for financial service provider and talents thriving for international career. Dear all, the world finds itself in a necessary transition to a more sustainable economic model. All economic actors, governments, multilateral institutions, businesses, financial service providers, households, each and every one of us are called upon to ensure a green transition, a transition that leaves no one behind. One important building block in the achievement of this global challenge is the cross-border cooperation between international financial markets and institutions that enable investment in sustainable economic projects that aim to create jobs and qualitative growth, simultaneously fighting climate change, protect the environment, and respect social standards. In this context, stock exchanges, investment funds, and asset managers play a vital role. They are essential for sustainable economic growth as they allow companies to raise capital through investments, public funding, raising debts, and others to expand their business. Also, talents play a fundamental role in the successful, sustainable ecosystem. During our 90 minutes, we will have the opportunity to tackle these topics from both the Indian and the Luxembourg perspective. It is my pleasure to start this event by welcoming in a moment here in the studio Julie Becker, CEO of the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, as well as Venkataramani Balasubramaniam, CEO of India INX from Gujarat International Finance Tech City. Both lead an international stock exchange and are thus deeply involved in green finance. I will have the pleasure of getting their insights on sustainable finance and to discuss, amongst others, the raising capital for green projects in India via platforms like the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. Julie, Bala, it is a real pleasure to welcome you here today. Your two stock exchanges signed the first MOU back in November 2020, paving the way for cooperation, which placed a specific focus on advancing green financing in India. Last June, you have signed a cooperation agreement to bridge the gap between India and international capital markets and strengthen cross-border cooperation in sustainable finance. The ultimate goal is to broaden the investor base for the issuers listed in India INX by enhancing the visibility of such securities to international investors. Since the cooperation agreement, Luxembourg Stock Exchange and India INX announced the emission on Luxembourg Stock Exchange of a 300 million green bond, which is already listed on India INX and now registered on Luxembourg Stock Exchange Securities official list. But before getting into the specifics, let me take a step back and ask you, Bala. India's COP26 commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2070 aims at leading the nation on a path to clean, green, and sustainable economic development. let me ask you, what are the main pillars of the Indian government's sustainable strategy? And perhaps also, are there any expectation to capital markets in India in general and India INX in particular for achieving these goals? Bala, I think you have to switch on.
Sorry. Good morning, Philip. Good morning to everyone in Luxembourg, and a good afternoon to all the people from India. So thanks for having me in this Luxembourg for Finance event. I think the Honorable Prime Minister of India, during his speech in Glasgow during the COP26, did call for a special movement called the LIFE, or Lifestyle for Environment, and subsequently launched the global movement for, or global initiative for the LIFE campaign on the World Environment Day. The goal of this campaign is to encourage an eco-friendly lifestyle. Thus, it totally reflects India's approach towards climate change and also sustainable lifestyle. India has shown global leadership in the fight against climate change and has committed to achieve a net zero emission by 2070, which it announced in the COP26 unilaterally. And for this, the strategy is that we need to mobilize investments almost over $10 trillion, and a significant part of it has to probably come from international investors. And typically, when we talk about the strategy the government has, we are talking about renewable energy in a big way to replace oil and coal. And India is today the third largest economy by purchase power terms. And I think in the next 7-8 years, we'll become the third largest economy in terms of the GDP. Already our GDP this year is estimated to be close to about $3.5 trillion. And by 2028, the plan is to achieve a GDP target of $10 trillion. So effectively, all this will only be possible if we are able to raise enough money to meet our climate change goals. And clearly, India International Exchange, as the international exchange from India, and also GIFT City, IFSC, which wants to become a leading global hub for green finance, which has been announced by the IFSC authority, which also recently created an expert panel on sustainable finance, of which I was also part of. And clearly, one of the goals was that how we can channelize more and more international investors to come through our platform. And this is where I think this significant partnership with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, which already is the global hub for green finance and probably the world leader, having presence across almost 132 countries in that sense, is extremely important for us. And we think this initiative of connecting both these exchanges, wherein a lot of Indian issuers who are looking at raising capital, especially for sustainable projects and green projects, they will be able to tap the European investors. And we think the first step has already been done with our partnership, which all started last year with our MOU. And this year we have signed the cooperation agreement. And 2 green bonds from India actually got listed on the Securities Official List, the State Bank of India and the PFC. And going forward, we think that this momentum will become much larger. And the win-win opportunity is that there are a lot of investors and there is a lot of excess capital in Europe, which can be invested in India, which can be invested at a good rate of good return, which can give a good return on capital. So this is a perfect happy marriage for both these institutions, and I think this will help in ensuring that India is able to go towards its target of reaching this 2070 target of net zero carbon effect in some sense.
Thank you very much, Bala. This was a quite good introduction, framing the discussions we are having now. So I'm now turning to Julie. Julie, Europe as well wants to become a sustainable finance hub and has presented the EU Green Deal to transition to a just, modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy with no net emissions by 2050s. And of course, finance is the cornerstone to achieve this ambitious goal. How does the Luxembourg Stock Exchange contribute to these objectives of the EU Green Deal? And where do you see the main challenges ahead on the road?
Good morning, Philippe, and thanks for your question. Good morning, Bala, and good afternoon, Bala, and good afternoon to our Indian audience. Well, to your question, Philippe, first, I think it's important to remind that the overarching objective of the EU Green Deal is clearly for Europe to become the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. And this will result in a cleaner environment, more affordable energy, of course, but also with respect to people in new jobs and overall a better quality of life. And this is important as this is a demonstration that transition, as you said in your introduction, can only succeed if it's conducted in a fair and inclusive manner. To your question, how LuxSC contributes to those objectives and supports the EU Green Deal, well, the Luxembourg Green Exchange, or LGX as we call it, is the leading platform for sustainable finance instruments and has helped finance sustainable development projects in Europe and throughout the world. Created in 2016 as a direct contribution to the Paris Climate Agreement and the UN SDGs, it's clearly a meeting place for issuers of sustainable products and impact-conscious investors. Today, we have a 42% market share, which demonstrates indeed that, as Bala mentioned it kindly, we are the reference platform worldwide for sustainable financial products. And we display issuers from all over the world. Currently, 250 issuers trust our exchange, want to be displayed on this exchange. They come from more than 50 countries. And as of the 30th of September, we were displaying more than 1,500 sustainable bonds for a total amount close to 815 billion euro. So as such, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange is clearly the listing of choice also for the European Union to issue its and display its sustainable securities, financing the EU Green Deal objectives, and of course other societal goals, such as the EU share. Therefore, clearly, LGX is an ally and a supporter of what the EC hopes to achieve from the EU Green Deal and other developments toward a low-carbon and more inclusive economy or union. Let me remind you, for the EU share, it was the first time European Union issued social bonds, the first one of 17 billion euro to help protect jobs and workers within Europe, which have been heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in total, it's 90 billion euro of social bonds that were issued under the EU share program, and all of them are listed on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and displayed on the Luxembourg Green Exchange. In the same philosophy, the Next Generation EU, the other program of the European Union, under this program, the European Union launched a 12 billion green bond to finance Europe's green recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. That was in October 2021. And it made the European Union the world's largest green bond issuer ever at that time, with a huge demand from the market. I think we will speak about investors afterwards, but it's interesting to underline that this bond was 11 times oversubscribed, with demand exceeding 135 billion euro, which means that was also the largest green bond order book ever in global capital markets at that time. Your second question was also about the challenges ahead. I think they are threefold. The first challenge is related to the geopolitical context. The second one is linked to social issues and the need for a fair transition. And the third one is linked to the risk of greenwashing. So with respect to the geopolitical context, of course, we all observe risks to derail green transition efforts. And the question is clearly, can the energy crisis put the timeline for reaching net zero at risk? In my personal opinion, I see it rather as an opportunity to accelerate the transition, as clean energy is indeed the energy of freedom, as the German finance minister said recently. And I think that investing in energy security is increasingly becoming a priority. Second challenge with respect to social tensions and the need for a just and fair transition. We all agree, I think, that the environmental transition can only succeed if it's conducted in an inclusive way. We are seeing anti-green movements emerging everywhere due to social consequences of increased prices. The ESG skepticism or criticism are rising also in the US. And it's clear that the transition, the climate transition, will impact our society unequally. And that's why it's so important to ensure the social transition as well. Social came to the fore just after the pandemic with huge level of social bond issuances in 2020 and 2021. And I believe investors really need to know what social investment means, what activities are bringing positive social outcomes. And so I look very much forward to the social taxonomy as well, which is about to be released, even if on hold for the moment, from the European Union. So we really need a transition, as you said in your introductions, that leaves no one behind, especially emerging markets. First, because they are representing most of the biodiversity on Earth, but also because, unfortunately, they will be the ones that are already and will be in the future the most impacted by climate change. And the question, by the way, is how can we scale up sustainable finance in those countries? Third and last challenge to conclude the risk of greenwashing, or we are even hearing about green smuggling for the moment. That was in the press in Washington at the occasion of the annual meeting where I was last week. Greenwashing is, of course, a key aspect that really needs to be addressed going forward, as of course it harms the integrity of the sustainable finance development. And I think we can reduce that risk by having a unified, harmonized global approach with respect to issuance, to disclosure and reporting for sustainable finance instruments. In this context, cross-border collaboration and cooperation is absolutely key.
Allow me a follow-up question on the green bonds. As most of you know, the EU Commission has issued an action plan for sustainable growth, establishing the taxonomy, so a classification system for sustainable investments, established transparency and reporting rules, but also planning to issue a green bond standard. So. What is this green bond standard bringing to a table that where already so many green bond standards internationally accepted? What can it bring to the table?
Well, first, I have to say that we are well positioned to speak about it, as the Luxembourg Stock Exchange was represented in the high-level expert group on sustainable finance and in the technical expert group on sustainable finance, and especially in the working group related to the EU GBS, the Green Bond Standard. So what it is, well, the EU Green Bond Standard is a proposed regulation laying down common and harmonized set of requirements, because as you said, there are plenty of guidelines and standards existing today. Unfortunately, no one is yet harmonized. But it's important to also underline that this EU GBS can be voluntarily applied. There's nothing which is mandatory in this respect. It sets a gold standard, and that's why it's so different from the other. It adds something, as it's a gold standard, as it requires first an alignment with the EU taxonomy, which makes, of course, the entire EU framework very consistent. It requests full transparency on how bonds are, or how proceeds are allocated, with an allocation report and an impact monitoring and reporting being required, that both should be reviewed by an external third party. And so what will it bring as addition to the other? It's much more stringent criteria that are required to be able to use the EU GBS, to be able to, for an issuers, to pretend to get the label of an EU green bond. You need to meet all those criteria, and they are more stringent. They are, for instance, additional requirements in terms of external reviews. And it's important as well to underline that those external reviewers will be supervised by the European supervisory markets authorities. So all of this to say that I think the European Commission is working towards more integrity in the market much more quality, supervising external reviewers, and trying also to standardize the disclosed information throughout this green bond standard. Because currently market-based and industry group standards such as the Sustainability Bond Guidelines, the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, the Climate Bond Taxonomy have shortcomings because there's no uniform definition of green, while we have now a first step of an EU taxonomy. And there's a lack of standardization of the disclosed information. With really requirements needing to be existing requirements needing to be clearly improved. So the EU GBS, of course, it is underpinned on the existing standards, but it really takes a leap forward and addresses the existing obstacles issuers and investors face today with the present market standards by determining that it should be aligned with the EU taxonomy. It sets reporting obligation for issuers of European green bond standards, green bonds, increasing in this context transparency and comparability. And it provides certainty and reliability, so ensuring the integrity, of course, of the market. I'd like also to mention two additional points, which are important as well in this context. We don't know yet what it will become, but the European Parliament, so last July, has asked whether the EU GBS should also introduce, in addition to everything which is existing in this context, adding disclosure at the entity level, notably asking for transition plans being disclosed by green bond issuers. And this is something very new. In a way that so far the green bond standards are really focusing on the product, on the instrument being issued and the process of issuance, with high level of transparency and disclosure being required at the level of the product. But now the Parliament is requesting as well transition plan to be disclosed at the level of the entity. And this is clearly a trend in the market and also a request from some issuers who do not want to invest only in green side projects, but clearly wants to know more also about the holistic approach, the sustainability approach of those issuers. Another element I wanted to mention as well, and which shows also the importance of this standard, is that investors, based on the current EU regulation, and in particular SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, they have to comply on the alignment of their portfolios to the EU taxonomy. So it's a need for them to know about the alignment with the EU taxonomy. And thanks to the EU Green Bond, complying with EU GBS, investing then in that type of instruments will make that disclosure much easier for investors.
And in taxonomy, which will grow over time.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Bala, I'm turning to you. You as an international financial market experts and observing what's happening with the EU action plan in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit what kind of differences you see when comparing in the developments in India and the EU when it comes to building a sustainable future?
So first and foremost, I think if you look at India traditionally, culturally, India has always been kind of having a culture deep-rooted, which has always been about preserving the ecology. That is basically what the rural India, or what we call as Bharat, is there. But of late, actually, because of the rapid kind of industrialization and basically the kind of industries which have come up over the last few years, and also given the set of challenges we as a country face in terms of having a very small geographic region, but having a population of almost 1.4 billion people. And our per capita income today is still, we are aspiring to become a middle income kind of country. So our needs today are very different from what there is in Europe. But having said that, even aside these two differences, I think the goal is very clear that climate change is a real problem. It is something which is going to impact all of us, and we need to do something clearly about it. And to that extent, there is a lot of consciousness in India that whatever practices we end up doing, it should be sustainable, it should be climate friendly, it should be ecologically friendly. So having said this, the regulators and the government here are mindful of both the challenges of how to develop the country in a faster pace, because we need a faster rate of growth compared to what is there in a developed side, especially in Europe and US and the North American markets and so on and so forth, vis-a-vis what our needs here in the South Asia or in the continent out here is. Keeping that in balance, but at the same time, the stress is now how do we start moving towards cleaner industries, greener industries? Because over the last 50, 60 years, I think there has been a movement for the West to actually outsource all basically climate damaging industries to this part of the world, which was because it was hungry and it was eager to kind of take up any kind of opportunity. But I think now India has reached a particular stage where it is no longer now succumbing to those kind of pressures. And it is very clear that it wants to build innovative indigenous solutions and at the same time be conscious that it can also start contributing to the world in terms of thought leadership as far as climate change is concerned. And towards this, I think there were a couple of very important announcements made. One was basically India has taken the leadership in the Global Solar Alliance. So we have now looked at solar energy and solar power as a major kind of a catalyst, a major kind of a thing, because as we are part of the tropical belt of the world, I think there is plenty of sunshine. So now a lot of R&D, a lot of technology, a lot of innovation is going into actually making India now the leader as far as solar power energy is concerned. And that is something which will transform the way we are dependent on the oil and coal economy. We want to completely kind of transform that. Second is, apart from that, there is also about water preservation. A lot of resources which are required to be preserved for deforestation, creating green practices in virtually all the industries, the bigger industries in terms of the construction industry, all of that. Now the practices are changing. Now, in fact, there is a clear policy goal and an incentive being pushed to actually have green buildings, green certified things on almost every industry, every area in some sense. And that is kind of changing the way people look at it. Thirdly, also, it's important that education plays a very important role. I think India probably as demographically, I think more than 65% of the population is below the age of 30. And typically we think that, and also India is one of the countries where there is still a very large young population. By 2050, I think we will probably be having the largest young population in the whole world. And I think it's time for us to, in fact, a lot of initiatives have been taken to educate people about climate change, which is real, uh, uh, basically encourage ecological practices. And in the finance industry, now I can already start seeing courses being put in colleges, in finance schools, etc., where sustainable finance is now coming in as a main kind of a subject. So education and awareness clearly is one part of that, one part of thought, which actually brings voluntarily changes. Thirdly, there is also a lot of kind of social movements because it's not just green, but it's also and not only environment but also social and governance aspects. So ESG as a whole, and I think there are a lot of initiatives which are getting taken across the board in terms of ESG related thoughts. And in fact, now virtually there is a pressure on all of corporate India that whatever they need to know, do everything should be in ESG kind of governance and ESG compliance kind of model. So that is clearly changing. In terms of the standards, obviously we are looking at the European Union, which Julie did mention about as the gold standard today, which is there in the world. Obviously, we are taking that as the utopian goal in terms of what we need to look at from a standard perspective. But clearly, we are having our own set of challenges to blindly kind of adopt it because we are at a different kind of a level in terms of our growth stage or our growth phase. But clearly, we are trying to see that how much maximum of these elements we can try to percolate it, if not in a particular exactly emulating that standard, but we are clearly buying that philosophy, buying that principle that this is where probably we need to kind of reach, and this is kind of thing which we need to probably on our own kind of reach at a much faster pace. So whatever all these goals about 2017 net zero, etc., these are all probably policy challenges, but India has always had a track record that compared to whatever are the targets set, we normally end up achieving things much earlier and much faster. And I think there are also from a capital market perspective, I would like to bring to attention that India INX itself is a very young exchange. We set out our journey in 2017. It's only about 5.5 years since we got created. And in 2018, we actually created the global securities market, which encouraged international listings of bonds from the Indian issuers and also try to attract international issuers to come here. And in 2020, we created a separate segment called the Green GSM with a very specific goal of being early adapters and also push the Indian market to go towards the green direction. And it's very encouraging that out of the total $132 billion of external commercial borrowing or the total international debt which Indian corporates have raised, almost $70 billion of these listings have come to India International Exchange. And out of this, in the last 2 years, the green portion has also now, the ESG portion has also now become substantial. As we speak, our total ESG issuance has reached 7.34 billion. And I think if you look at the proportion, it just looks like 10% of the total listings. But I think this ratio is going to definitely change. As we go forward, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we will see the ratios getting reversed. Probably 70 to 80% of the total listings which we are going to see will all be ESG kind of listings, which is what we are aspiring to. And also from a structural perspective, we are also very well aligned with our policymakers. Our regulator, which is IFSC authority, which got set up just 2 years back, already has signed MOUs with various international forums and also has become part of IOSCO. And recently has also tied up with the Luxembourg market regulator. And they have, in the committee report, which was published about a fortnight back, they have actually now consciously set up a separate department for green finance and climate change. So effectively, ESG finance is something which is catching the policy making space. And one of the goals which they are clearly looking at is in the next couple of years, create a taxonomy which is very much at par with what the Euro standards are. I think I'll be happy if we can achieve that standard in that kind of a short time frame. But clearly the movement to align with the global best practices, making sure that we are not very far off from the standards. And as Julie rightly mentioned, the bigger risks of greenwashing and all those are the things which we want to curb, because one is we can actually make the standards extremely rigid, which will actually make it it will tempt more and more issuers to start saying that they are complying with the standard while they may actually be not up to that. So it's important that we actually give them some realistic benchmarks and goals to look at it. So it's clearly, in some sense, we are leading the market up, but I think our target is in the next 5 to 10 years, clearly by 2030, we should be aligned with the best standards as far as the global, as far as India as a market is concerned.
Bala, I have so many follow-up questions for you, but unfortunately we have run out of time. So I think I will question you the next time I'm in India in person, and we will continue this interesting conversation. Julie, maybe a quick last question is, what are investors looking for at the moment, especially considering these challenging times of uncertainties?
Well, I think the main uncertainties this year has brought clearly has had to an understandable degree of caution on both sides of the market, by the way. So we saw, as Bala just mentioned, a first decline since record year of 2015. However, with the 10% of ESG representing sustainable finance products on INX exchange, I think this is exactly the mirroring what's happening on global markets, because there was so sustainable finance slipped just 1 percentage point to take a 9% share of the market. But interestingly, a Russell survey underlines that fixed income instruments is now the leading asset class for which sustainability considerations have been implementing, increasing to 53% in 2022 from 35% in 2021. And this shows the resilience of the sustainable bond market. It shows as well that investors are looking to support the green transition. To respond to your question, what are they looking for? They're looking for supporting the green transition. They are aware that climate risk is financial risk. is they are aware of the need for accelerated investment in clean energy and sustainable solutions. Investors are also looking for credibility. The recent greenwashing cases in particular have added an extra level caution for investors. So that's the reason why one of our key priorities is transparency, ensuring that all information is made available for investors to make well-informed investment decisions. And this means as well that for issuers being displayed on our platform, this will highlight the credibility of their securities because of the stringent process we put in place with mandatory requirements to be displayed on the green exchange. Thirdly, what investors want, they want to access impact information. They need to measure. They need to measure their investments. They want to understand where their money is going and what impact they are triggering through their investments. And they really want to see now concrete actions and measure the impact of their actions. So we used to say it's time to act. I think it's clearly time to deliver. And investors want also to be able to assess how issuers are delivering concretely thanks to their investments. And this is also why we have created the Luxembourg Green Exchange Data Hub, which is a unique database with very structured and granular data that allow investors to assess the impact of their investments, and which covers today around 9,000 bonds. To conclude, investors are also looking for yield and liquidity. This should be clearly stated as well. And this can be found in emerging markets. And so the challenge is clearly today, how do you hedge against transparency risk in those emerging markets, against risk of confiscation or against political risks? And this is the task, by the way, of the high-level expert group now just being created on scaling up sustainable finance in emerging countries to identify opportunities and challenges, to identify products, and also how to channel and facilitate global investment in those countries. To conclude, investors want to focus on creating long-term value as opposed to short-term profits. And this is what sustainable finance is all about, long-term creation, long-term value creation. And this is why also sustainable investment and companies that which have a strong ESG credential have proven to be much more stable, much less volatile in uncertainties time.
The numbers you mentioned seem to confirm that both you, Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and India INX are on a good path. I wish you all the best for the future, facing the challenges, but also exploring the opportunities together. Thank you very much, Bala. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will now hand the floor to Anand Pattabiraman, Independent Director and Founding Partner of ESG Wise, to moderate our next panel that will delve into the role of Luxembourg investment funds and how they help channel investments to India.
Good morning and good afternoon to all. Investment climate in India has improved considerably since the opening of the economy in 1991. And specifically, the mutual funds industry has grown fivefold in the last 10 years. Despite the current economic situation, India is said to be among the fastest growing economies in the world, with an average of 7.2% over the next 5 years. Today, we are here with our panelists, the opportunities, trends, and how Luxembourg, being the second largest investment fund center with 57% share in the global cross-border funds, help channel investments into India. I would like to welcome our panelists, Mr. Avinash Satwalekar, President, Franklin Templeton Asset Management, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Group President and Managing Director at Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company, and Alessandro Silvestro, Managing Director for Asia Pacific from Lemonic. Hello, everyone. Starting with you, Avinash, India is still lagging behind many of the developing countries when it comes to foreign direct investments, which stands only around 75 or 85 billion US dollars in spite of the growth and potential. Where do you think India is in terms of the investment opportunities for international investors?
Great. Well, firstly, thanks for having me on the panel. India has actually come a long way when you think about FDI flows, almost doubling from 45 billion in the 2014 to 2015 timeframe to, as you said, the 85 billion in the 21-22 timeframe. The government also expects to be on track to get to 100 billion in the 22 to 23 year. Now, there's a couple of different reasons, right? I mean, India is clearly one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It is the third largest when you talk from a purchasing power parity standpoint, and a market capitalization that is the fifth largest. Now, the reasons India is an attractive market probably is because demographics is the number one factor, right? You've got north of 50%, 56% to be precise, of the population that is under the age of 25, which makes it a really attractive destination to provide not just products, but also kind of investment solutions. And I'd say there's a number of different policy reforms that have been put in place that will attract more FDI, whether that's the goods and services tax or GST, which kind of makes it a single tax across all goods and services from manufacturers to consumers, or the cut in the corporate tax rate, the rationalization of labor laws, the implementation of an insolvency and bankruptcy code, the Make in India program. So there's a number of different programs that are in place that I think will make India a significantly more attractive location from an FDI perspective.
That's a very interesting insight on that. Nilesh, you have successfully raised capital from Europe, especially through Luxembourg. What's your take on the investment opportunities in India, and how do you see the trend in terms of capital flows into India?
Thank you for having me over here. When I started my career in capital market, our GDP was about $300 billion. That was about 30 years back in early 90s. And market cap was about $300 billion. Last year, our economy was about $3 trillion. And market cap was about $3 trillion. So in 30 years, we have grown about 10 times. This has made India fifth largest economy in the world. It has delivered about 1.5 times more return than MSCI emerging market over the last 20 years. Over the next 30 years, can India become 10 times bigger from here? Well, there is always a possibility despite all the challenges. If we are traveling from $3 trillion to $30 trillion, will our market cap move in similar direction? Answer is probably yes. So here is the opportunity for global investors to participate in a growth story like what Japan witnessed between 60s and 80s, or what China witnessed in the early part of this century. So I firmly believe there's no better opportunity than India for global investors. We provide 3 Gs. One is earnings growth. This is $3 trillion to $30 trillion journey. Corporates will grow, their profitability will grow. The second thing is governance. Our governance standards are far better than most emerging markets. You are unlikely to get a country where governance standards in emerging markets will be as good as India. And third is our focus on social and environmental side. Your returns will be green in India. We are one of the few countries in the world which is on its way to achieve COP26 or Paris Accord commitment. So investors looking for 3G of growth, green, and governance will find India an equally an interesting opportunity.
Thanks for that. On to you, Alessandro. you know the Asian market very well. How do you think we can help the Indian managers to raise awareness and, in order to channel investments through Luxembourg?
Look, thank you again, Anand and LFF, for having me. I think the Luxembourg value proposition can be articulated in many ways, but the best summarize is gateway to go global. This is the best summary you can have. Indian managers may be strong in India, may be strong in Asia, but the world-class tool to go global are EU funds, such as the UCITS and the EIF. I was in a conference recently in Singapore, and I was talking to many Asian managers, and especially Indian managers, that were talking to me and saying, you know, why do I need the Luxembourg fund when I have just set up a Singaporean VCC, which is, by the way, a great tool? But my answer was very simple. Luxembourg funds are sold all over the world, and and any other product can do that. Luxembourg is really unique for that. So to answer your questions, Anand, to channel investment into India, I suggest to my Indian clients and prospects to leverage the FMD. There are over 107 unicorn in India, and actually 44 only in 2021. So many PE opportunities, VC, buyout, IT, technology, loans opportunities. India did a very good job in attracting investments. In return, the AFMD could be a great way to capture those opportunities. The LFF, the ALFI, and many services providers can help Asian GP to make life easy and comply with the AFMD. A Ray fund, for instance, can be quickly set up, or Lux partnership as well, between 4 to 6 weeks, and that will allow Indian managers to raise money in Europe and to invest them back in Indian PE and VC, for instance. And why should they do that? Because European investors have appetite for Asian PE right now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Alessandro. Moving on back to you, Nilesh, what barriers remain for capital flow into India? What could Luxembourg do to raise the awareness of its benefits?
Essentially, very recently, a Spanish newspaper talked about India's growth story, where our growth chart was coming out of snake charmer's pipe. And this picture truly represents impression of India. There are many people who believe India is still snake charmer's country. And this is where we need help from Luxembourg to educate investors about the opportunity in India. You know, in 2003, one of our automobile company, Maruti Suzuki, got listed. It's over 20 years that Maruti has delivered more return in US dollar terms than all the Japanese automobile companies like Honda, Toyota, Nissan, and Suzuki put together. It has delivered more return than German automobile companies like Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz put together. It has delivered more return than American automobile companies like Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors put together. You will notice that I'm excluding one particular American automobile company. It has delivered more return than Korean automobiles company like Hyundai and SsangYong put together. Now, this is the information which is not available to the investors. They are still driven by old impression, and which is where we need a bridge between investors' perceptions versus what's the reality in India. And like any market, there is volatility in India. There are challenges in India. Money making is not a simple thing. It's never easy. And which is where we need efforts from like-minded people who can present the green growth and governance of India story to every investor.
And Avinash, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, sure. I think, Luxembourg has been a strong economic partner of India in the EU. For example, the India INX, which is our exchange in the Gift City in Gujarat, has entered into a MOU with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange for the development and promotion of ESG and green finance. Now, this is an important development because India does plan to issue nearly $2 billion of sovereign green funds in the current fiscal year. So the agreement which allows a dual listing in India INX as well as the Lux SE will go a long way towards providing access to green capital to Indian corporates from international investors. Recently, Power Finance Corporation dual listed its 300 million euro green bond through this arrangement. So I think we're going to need to see a lot more of these, and similar to kind of what Nilesh's point was, which was an education process, so that we are benefiting from the point of view that European investors start looking and taking the Indian capital markets in a serious manner. And on the flip side, if you don't take it seriously, you're more likely to lose out on the return potential that the Indian capital markets and the economy has to provide.
Yeah. Going back to you, Alessandro, like you kind of touched the PE and the alternative side when when we were more talking about the listed or equity side of things, but the trend is kind of like shifting, and I've seen a lot of Asian managers setting up alternative structures in Luxembourg. Even from Japan, moving out of the traditional way of investment in other jurisdictions. How do you see the trend, or being there in Asia? What do you see, and why do you think that they're all coming to Luxembourg?
Thanks, Anand. First of all, the background. The FMD, it's still a young industry. It was set up in 2013, so it's not even half 10 years. In Europe, though, it already represents 7 trillion industry, or 37% of the fund, European fund, are currently AIF. Luxembourg, and moving to Luxembourg AIF alone represent over 1 trillion. And this AUM will certainly grow for the following reasons. The legal tool we have, it's amazing. The investors appreciate Luxembourg product, and that's the most important. And finally, with some of the trends we are seeing, like the retailization of the AIF, the Luxembourg can just grow. Now, when you look at the FMD in the beginning, in the first 2-3 years, mainly US managers and European managers successfully leveraged the FMD. Why? Because the Asian managers were more focused into Asia. There is so much money into Asia right now that Indian managers were focused on their country, China, Japan, Southeast Asia, you name it. They were more focused in the region. But Anand, when you reach a certain AUM, when you reach a certain PE maturity, when you are at your fund number 4, 5, 6, you have this global appeal. And this global appeal can be successfully tackled with European funds. We have currently many opportunities from Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean managers that are interested into Lux vehicles. And as we quickly touched base before, setting up a Luxembourg AIF can be done very quickly, between 4 weeks to 6 weeks for a RAIF or Luxembourg partnership. And they offer the guarantee the investor protection, which is what Luxembourg is known for.
Yeah. And Avinash, how do you think India can capitalize from this trend?
I think the trend of kind of investing both on the private side, whether it's through private equity or through venture capital, there is a very clear focus on it. So the government, in fact, has constituted an expert panel to suggest ways to scale up these venture capital and private equity investments. And those will be focused on, let's say, for example, the sunrise sectors. And there are more initiatives in terms of whether it's regulatory practices that need to be changed, bringing in global practices. So all of those things are going to accelerate making India an even more attractive location from both a private equity as well as a venture capital zone. Now, just from a numbers perspective, right? Currently, there's been approximately 77 billion in 2021 that was invested through private equity and venture capital funds in India in just that 1 year, and that was a 62% increase over the previous year. Luxembourg is the 3rd largest source of foreign portfolio investments into India, right? And so Luxembourg plays a very important role in terms of attracting that investment into India. Now, the other factor also is that the number of Luxembourg-based foreign portfolio investment firms that were registered with SEBI has risen from about 100 in 2012 to 1,143 in March 2020. So you've seen almost a 10x increase in registrations for foreign portfolio investments in India through Luxembourg. So clearly there is a attraction that is being understood by the investors, but I think there's significantly much more that can be done and much more that can be benefited from these investments.
Okay. And Nilesh, do you anticipate more Indian managers setting up alternative structures, more on the private equity and venture capital side in Luxembourg?
Undoubtedly, yes. India offers great opportunity on private equity, venture capital, structured credit, mezzanine financing, and real estate kind of opportunities. These opportunities are better captured via AIF kind of structure. And again, in a world where, while right now interest rates are rising, but who knows how long they will rise. In that kind of scenario, alternate investments will always be preferred option for investors. And Indian fund managers will be using Luxembourg jurisdiction to tap into global capital flows.
Thanks for that. And moving on to a very important topic, the Indian sustainable investment space only makes up around 10 to 15% of the AUM by PE and venture capital funds. However, the growth in the space is kind of gaining momentum, like we all discussed before, and the surge is expected to reach around 125 billion by 2026, and that's going to be around 40% of the AUM by the PE and VC fund firms. Alessandro, Luxembourg is an established market leader with about 1/3 of the asset managed by sustainable funds in Europe being domiciled in Luxembourg. What are the tools that you would like to highlight that Luxembourg can offer to Indian alternative fund promoters to accelerate the surge of sustainable investments?
I think, Anand, this should be a question to you, and I should ask you the question, not the other way around, as you are the big ESG expert. Now, I'll say a few things, and please feel free to complement. So first of all, for sure, ESG is a very big thing in Europe and also very promising. There are already so many RFPs that are issued for asset managers that are articles 8 or 9 only, so that are ESG compliant so that are ESG compliant. Obviously, though, the ESG is still a young industry and facing challenges, and a lot of details have still to be emerged. I think on the liquid space, we are pretty well advanced and we're pretty well on track. Now, we have to recognize that on the alternative space, it is challenging sometimes to find ESG data for liquid assets. And this is where the industry is currently working and is currently pushing. So I would say that the main challenges are finding the right sources, and as well, sometimes the cost of these ESG data are onerous. Now, from my company perspective, we can see that from all the Asian clients that we have under supervision, 20% are already Article 8 or 9, and an additional 20% are looking to upgrade their funds from Article 6 to Article 8 or 9. So I can forecast that by next year, 40% of our clients will be Article 8 or 9, which is significant. A last point that I would say is be cautious. You don't want to be Article 9 just to be able to respond to an RFP and then being on the media because you're doing greenwashing. ESG is a very important topic, very serious and very complex. So you need to have teams, resources to be able to comply with it. And too many times we read unfortunately bad media about greenwashing or exaggerating the real ESG data.
Thanks for that. And going back to you, Nilesh, I myself have seen that there are the BRSR standards that has been put in place. The companies have already started doing voluntary disclosures. And by my personal experience, I can say that, like Avinash mentioned before, the Indian market is actually well ahead of voluntary disclosures and regulations and standards when it comes to even Europe, for example. Do you want to quickly give us like kind of timelines or what is expected or what we can expect in the future coming from an ESG perspective?
So Anand, ESG is an evolving concept, and many a times what is acceptable in Western world might not be applicable in India. And what is applicable in India might not be acceptable in Western world. But clearly we'll have to keep pace with the time. It is our responsibility that we leave a better planet to our next generation. Over here, regulator like SEBI has to lead in establishing rules, regulations, disclosure. Investors like ourselves have to support in communicating with corporates and also incentivizing same for a good behavior. And finally, corporates have to take the lead in ensuring that their reporting, their communication, and their action on ground are matching with the expectations of investors and regulators. We were the first mutual fund company in India to sign for United Nations of Principle of Responsible Investing. And the journey has been fairly good, learning from UNPRI and applying it to Indian corporates, Indian regulations. And under guidance of SEBI, we believe will remain ahead of the pack on environmental, social, and governance side. But it's an evolving thing. We'll have to keep on running on the treadmill to ensure that we remain ahead.
Thanks. Avinash, do you want to add any point specific to this?
I think ESG and sustainable investing in general has definitely taken on a lot more interest, a lot more focus, not just globally, but even in Asia. But I do think that the definitions of what would constitute, I don't think you can apply the same rules uniformly across all countries, all nations, especially when it comes to emerging markets. I think there is a role and a responsibility across the board for both corporates as well as investors that are providing capital. But it is one of those spaces that is evolving. I think the rules and the understanding of what is required to be sustainable are also changing. And I think at the end of the day, there is a very clear mandate, right, where we are trying to focus and make sure that whatever we do is done in a sustainable manner, whether that is investments from our corporates that are making these investments in their plants and machinery, or whether it is capital providers like us on the fund management side that are looking at what kind of actions they are taking. So I think governance has always been a big factor and an important factor. I think on the social side as well, there has been enough and more in terms of progress that has been made. On the environmental side, there is clearly a lot of focus, but the definitions and the standards are clearly going to be different and evolving across both developed as well as emerging markets.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks a lot. That brings us to the end. And thanks again to the panelists, and hope the session was informative. Have a good day, and thank you.
Anand, Avinash, Nilesh, Alessandro, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights and knowledge about this topic. Ladies and gentlemen, we have tackled international financial markets, asset management and the investment fund industry, both from a Luxembourg and an Indian perspective. We are coming now to the last part of our session, which will tackle a very important aspect that is responsible for the successful development of any financial center, and these are talents. My colleague Lynn Robricks will now explore with its panel the opportunities emerging in the financial industries for those talents. Lynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip. Now, staying with the theme of building bridges between countries, it's clear that we really need the right experts and talent to really further develop the activities that were also discussed by the earlier speakers. Financial services is changing. New opportunities, new responsibilities, and also new technologies are arising. And these are also reshaping the jobs and the skills in finance. Now, people often talk about international competition and also fierce hunting of talent between countries and financial hubs. But no one can deny that the best teams, but also the best innovations, are often created through international connections and international collaboration. And there is a match to be made here between India as a country for highly qualified professionals in finance and business, and also Luxembourg as a hub for cross-border financial services. And therefore, I have the pleasure to welcome 3 guests here today. They all have an impressive international and professional track record in common. And my first guest is Lokdeep Singh. He is the recently appointed global CEO of Talkwalker, a consumer intelligence company providing services to over 2,500 brands in the world. Then we also have Dr. Pranjul Shah, who is leading the accelerator at the Luxembourg University. He's also the chief architect of also the venture mentoring programs, the entrepreneurship programs, and the accelerator. And last but not least, also Anjani Ladia. You are the chairman of the Luxembourg chapter of the Indian Institute of Chartered Accountants. Audit and accounting are in your blood, and your focus is the fund industry. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the studio.
And Lynn, thank you so much for hosting us. So nice to be here. Great to be here with the other panelists.
Thank you. Well, let me start with you, Lokdeep, because financial firms are fiercely hunting for talent, and experts also warn for a shortage of talent in financial services. And all of this has also been further accelerated in a certain sense by COVID-19. Now, I assume that this talent hunt is something that can also be witnessed in India, given that it's a huge and growing market. But can India perhaps also be seen as the solution to fill this worldwide talent gap?
Absolutely. The hunt for talent, as you describe it, of course, is a global phenomenon. And India is not an exception to that. Like, actually looking at the data, you can tell that next to the IT sector, banking and financial services is the most competitive in India, right? Now, having said that, I would argue that it's not a reflection of the lack of talent or talent pool in India, but rather a reflection on the abundance of opportunity we have in India. So what's happening in India is actually really, really interesting. We have about 600 million people with mobile internet access, which means that the adoption rate for fintech, digital payments, digital banking is actually the highest globally, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that fintech as a market is really booming in India. It's the 3rd largest ecosystem globally within India. And then the year-on-year growth is about 27%. When it comes to the professionals, nearly 10% of the jobs last year, based on the data from monster.com, were actually filled in the financial sector. So my point with all this is that there's a high degree of maturity in India when it comes to financial services. And the growth is being driven by a rather skilled talent pool that is ready. Now, second part of your question, right, is absolutely there is competition for this talent within India. But I believe, and I'm a prime example of that, and so are the two of you, is that working for a US company, working for an international European company has always been a compelling proposition for the Indian talent. I think what we got to do better is create awareness. And I think as we go into the chat, we will talk a bit more about that.
Pranjul, I actually would like to stay with this same question. You have worked with many international universities all over the world, ranging from Harvard to Stanford to MIT, Barcelona. So you've been always at the source of that talent pipeline. Is there anything you would like to add also about that international talent market to what Lokdeep just said?
I would definitely to second him in the fact that there is an abundance of opportunity, but the challenge of the talent gap is not just the challenge in the sector of recruitment, it's also the challenge of universities to recruit the top talent, because these days the Zennials are looking at different career options, so many of them want to become entrepreneurs. University of Luxembourg as general and Luxembourg as a whole has done actually fairly well, because the number of students coming from India to the university and the applications have grown year on year. And we are now about 140 students in different research as well as educational programs. And this number has been continually growing. And I think this is a trend what we'll continue to see over the coming years. I have to commend the Embassy of India for their vision here, because they announced special scholarships for Indian students to really attract them specifically to our sector here and to showcase Luxembourg as a great place to build your career. And these 5 positions routinely brings in about thousands of applications. So I'm hats off to the embassy for their vision, but also the tough job they're doing to scout this talent and attract them to Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And Gianni, now the two of us, let's zoom in together on financial services in particular, because your private equity expertise brought you to Luxembourg, and you know the two financial ecosystems pretty well. What are, according to you, let's say the skills and expertise that are required to further build the synergies between the two ecosystems?
Right, Lynn, very important point. India is known about its doctors, engineers, but also the hidden talent about our financial commerce graduates. We groom almost more than 2.5 million graduates every year in the field of finance, accounting, management, who are ready to serve the Indian market, which is the global market servicing, as well as the outside of as an expats going out from India to these multinationals. India has been serving global multinationals from a couple of decades now, and big financial firms like JP Morgan's, like banks, State Streets, MasterCards, Visas, they have their back offices, financial back offices since last 20 years. And who are they recruiting? Financial accounting graduates who are coming out from our right education system. The Big Fours are the biggest recruiters, Big Fours in India. They are servicing as a global delivery centers now across the whole world, and they recruit professionals and financial graduates who are good in accounting skills, data management skills, analysis skills, reporting skills, which is following the international reporting standards, and that is already being taught at the education level, but also on the job by these multinationals to these people, and they are ready to deliver the best skill sets to the world, as now called as knowledge process offices. Lot of things apart from back office is the past, but the more value-added tasks are happening in India. So there is a lot more synergies that could be brought between the two countries to serve the global centers, including Luxembourg. And this trend has already started. Means the Big Fours are recruiting in India, whether it's PwC, EYs, Deloitte, and they are sending their professionals to the west, to the east, and also to the Europe. And Luxembourg is not also left behind. That's why you see a lot of influx of financial professionals coming in Luxembourg. And we are now 100 chartered accountants working in Luxembourg, in the accounting finance field.
Excellent. Well, actually, building also on what you just said with all the skills that you mentioned, India is also known as the wellspring for tech talent in the world. Financial service firms are becoming more and more tech firms. Lokdeep, what would you like maybe to share with us on those tech and science skills, but also the demand for other fields of expertise that are becoming more and more relevant?
Absolutely. I'll say a couple of things there, Len. So the first, like you started to say, right, tech itself is coming to all sectors, finance included, right? So if you look at the top skills that are needed in the fintech industry, what are they? The artificial intelligence, machine learning, programming skills, maybe blockchain. All of these are strengths that India has because of the heritage on the IT side, right? So first is the IT that's coming to finance and other sectors. So that's why we're seeing branching off. So not just engineers for the IT firms, big tech, but also engineers that will actually enable fintech and other industries, right? So that's point number one. Point number two, and Anjani started to say that, it is very true that when I grew up, and perhaps the two of you as well, you know, the only two fields you could pursue and be successful was medicine and engineering. But that has changed drastically over the last 20 years or so. So our education system, even our social structure, so you will, is now more geared towards like a broader set of talent, right? So that's the second point. Third is we are also looking at some very, very successful entrepreneurs, professionals, right, who have become very successful in the classical finance jobs and working really well in some of the world famous financial hubs. So it is expanding. We will IT, I believe, will continue to be our strength. But as a result of that, I think the Indian talent pool will broaden its scope and go into other sectors. That's what I believe.
And continuing on the topic of technology, financial firms are in a position right now where they more and more need to compete with the Googles and the Amazons of this world. Also, Prime Minister Narendra Modi mentioned the fintech revolution with Gift City, also as a data security hub, fintech hub. Now, Prajul, how do you see that with the incubator, and how do you see that growth going forward?
I think this is an excellent opportunity that both of our prime ministers already witnessed and highlighted in 2020 in their prime ministerial summit. So they already highlighted to the university that we should look into developing an India-Luxembourg hackathon. And I'm glad to say that now we have zoomed in on a date. Next year in February, we'll invite 30 students from India who would fly into Luxembourg and compete on solving the biggest challenges in the fintech sector, cybersecurity, AI, life sciences, space. These are curated challenges which our ecosystem of corporate leaders will provide, and the goal is that they work together on developing the next solutions. So yes, the talent bridge is something that we're building also at the university and incubator level. This is the first of the many to come, hopefully. We see also the change in the mindset of the next generation of students who are coming from India, but also as a whole, that there's a lot more entrepreneurial leadership and initiatives that they are willing to take. And we are starting to see already some Indian students launching some companies in the financial sector. So that's already happening. A lot of them already have friends back home who can do the first coding and development for them. So that's the pace at which this will shift and make a huge contribution to the financial services sector in Luxembourg is just going to be phenomenal. It will only accelerate from here.
Yeah. So now we cannot have this panel or this discussion without talking about green finance and sustainable finance. It was also discussed with Julie Becker of the Stock Exchange in the earlier panel. Anjani, what are the skills that professionals these days, given also the growing responsibilities, need to bring to the table in the financial industry to also help that global transition to a low-carbon economy?
ESG is the term, right? Term of the decade, sustainability. I think there is a gap at the moment on the existing workforce and also the upcoming workforce of the generations to here. everybody is talking about ESG, but the main question to be understood is there are four main broad categories that we could bring up our skill sets for, would be in the understanding what an ESG means, what are its regulations, what are its standards, what is required for the corporations. Then probably also measurement, measurement, nothing could be possible if there is no data and data analysis on it. So the skill sets for the measurement and the analysis of that data is very much required for the professionals. And then how to report them into the financial statement reports or any kind of available reports, the studies into the market, and how to validate it is the auditing of it. So understanding, data measurement, reporting, and auditing are the four skill sets that would be required in this ESG field, which the trend has not started. There are university courses that has to be built into their financial modules, or into the study diploma courses for the existing coming generations to touch a topic about ESG on the global broader aspects and touching of the key parameters of their interest. And then there is a very much need of the existing workforce who would want to understand what really the ESG means. E of ESG is bringing up now, but S is also catching up. So we have to get it up.
Because there is no ESG also without the G. So.
Yes.
But the continuing learning is happening.
It is, we as an international, global versus local, we are partnering with international institutional bodies to come up with the right governance frameworks, standards, which could be applicable for its implementation for ESG parameters for the upcoming reportings. I feel that it will become a product of its own, because once we capture all these aspects, then people can also invest into this, and then ESG investing will be the key to understand from the financial perspective that how to make money out of it from the investment world, because I come from the private equity, and the private equities are the big bucks making on this sector at the moment. So if they understand, I think the world has to understand with these four skill sets.
Now, thank you, Anjani. Lokdeep, you're leading a international company. You employ over 50 different nationalities, and we also see other leading international firms in Luxembourg, such as ArcelorMittal, but also the satellite company SAS, that are led by Indian managers. Besides all the technical and the financial skills, what are the most important leadership skills also that can be brought to the table for global organizations that are also often operating out of Europe, the US, and India?
That's a great question. And I'm afraid the list is rather long, but I'll give you the top three. I think there are some obvious ones, right, which I would argue are common to all good leaders, irrespective of where they come from. And that's like strong work ethic, hard work, determination, right? So that's a constant, right? I would say skills that are, if not uniquely Indian, but strongly Indian, would be like creativity, critical thinking, all in one together, growth mindset, and then the third one, perseverance. Now, why I say this is like growing up in India, it's a rather tough place. It's highly competitive. And to give you an example, to make it to one of the IITs, which is like the premier tech schools in India, the success rate is 1% or low. We have a chartered accountant here. In his case, the success rate or the pass rate would be around 10%, right? So the Indian talent, right from the get-go, goes through a lot of grinding, right? And it happens many times over. So I think what you see coming to the top is, in some ways, one of the best, right? So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think if I could add to that, is that there's a diversity. So strength and diversity is something that's natural to the Indian leaders. We are surrounded by an environment which is multilingual, and we bring that mindset to Europe or US, wherever we go. So those would be the three I would describe.
Mm-hmm. Now, the leaders that have that perseverance and also that great willingness to go for an international career, often probably they go for the US or the UK. What, according to you, can also be an attractive choice to go for continental Europe or Luxembourg for them?
Yeah, that's the key question, right? So the way I would answer this is that, you know, US has always been this shiny city on the hill, right? Has this mass appeal. And I don't think that's changing anytime, right? And that's actually for the good. Now, having spent time both in the US and then here, equal amount of time, I actually believe that we have an equally compelling proposition. But what US does a great job with is actually marketing that, right? So if you look at, you know, what is the talent looking for, irrespective of where you come, it's always the same: quality of life, balance with cost of living, right? Security for the family, and then the bigger opportunity pool. And once again, I think we have a very compelling proposition across all three of these. We need to increase awareness. I would also say that another way to make us attractive is what Anjani was talking about: more outsourcing to the Indian companies, because that's a stepping stone, right? And then more networking, just like what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. We have seen the Indian community grow, and you're very well connected to the community. What would you say that what works well, and also what kind of advice would you provide to people that are willing to make the move here?
Right, being a global toddler now, you know, India, New York, US, London, it's ending up in Luxembourg. I would say the four things which I carried along with me, which I could share, would be is the right attitude, the personality, working on the local requirements, bridging your gaps of transformation. Means you could be experienced throughout everywhere, but the local is the most value. And then finding the right mentor locally as well. That is the four things that you should work upon it when you are coming into any new jurisdictions. I would also like to bring up one point regarding the trailing spouses who come in. They are highly educated, well qualified, and also have a decent work experience. And we have the half of the population currently sitting in Luxembourg in their homes. So there could be something that could be developed, a mechanism of cross-functional or cross-jurisdictional equivalency certificates. So the MOUs and MRAs, mutual recognition agreements, needs to be in place to give those sitting idle, qualified people at home that also becoming a part of the workforce. So when they get a chance, they can adapt to the localization of the skills that's needed and be ready to work in this market.
Pranjul, because you're right in the incubator and also the accelerator, so you can take a look into the future. What are the most important opportunities you still see going forward?
I think what is important to highlight is that we may speak 27 different languages in India, but at the end of the day, we are all together, and it's a community. And I think the community as a whole, I think now Luxembourg has seen a phenomenal growth. And what I would like to say is almost that during COVID, we reached a tipping point of the community. We have now passed getting close to 1% of the population in Luxembourg, so close to 5,000 Indians. And all of these are actually ambassadors for Luxembourg, because they are calling their people back home, and their nephews and nieces are entering university. I get emails from them saying, hey, which course would you recommend? Is the medical school good for the future doctors that can come out? And I think that's a great way that the university is actually helping, not just bringing in new talent here, but also many of the spouses that Anjani was mentioning are actually taking up courses to kind of rejoin the workforce with new skills. And I think that's something that's it's a great phenomenon that we have started to witness during COVID, with more than 1,500 people landing in Luxembourg during COVID. And I think that's just a great sign to see that this talent gap that Luxembourg is facing, I think India is going to make a huge dent in there in the coming years.
That's actually all very encouraging, and I would love to have more time, but we don't. We ran already a little bit over time. But talent and skills are clearly a topic that requires much more attention in the future, especially given the very important role that financial services play in our societies, in creating jobs, financing the economy, but also making that transition to a greener future. Now, in the meantime, I would really like to express a very warm thank you to you, Lokdeep, Pranjul, and Jani. It has been a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn, thanks for having
Great
us.
to be here.
Back to you, Philip.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Anjani, Pranjul, and Lokdeep. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to an end of this interesting session. I hope you have enjoyed it. Our sessions on the many facets of this mutual beneficial relationship between India and Luxembourg that has developed over decades now. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us in case you have questions or simply like to connect. Lynn Robrix will have the opportunity during our next Focus on Skills on 9th of November 2022 to further deep into the skill sets, the demand for tech talent in finance, innovative service providers, and the critical skills in the future. We hope you will join us again on 9th of November. Till then, take care.